Welcome to Talking Business, a podcast produced in Melbourne, Australia. The podcast is available on the Acast site, my own website, the Apple Podcast Store, or wherever you go to get your podcasts. Or you can get it at the Business Acumen website at www.businessacumen.biz. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from my website, leongettler.com. I am Leon Gettler. My job is to review and monitor the week's news in business, finance and economics. I bring it all to you every week. This is episode number 24 in our series for 2025, and today's date is Friday, July the 25th. First, I'll be talking to David J Greer, an entrepreneurial coach. We'll look at how he creates high-performing and high-growth startups and mid-market businesses, examining the challenges they face. He also helps entrepreneurs challenge with alcoholism or addiction, drawing from his own experience with drink. And I'll be talking to RMIT economist Jonathan Boymel about trends in the Australian property market. But first, let's talk to David J Greer.
Well, David, as a coach, you deal with alcoholism and drug addiction for entrepreneurs. Is that right?
Right. So, principally, I focus on high-performing entrepreneurs. And, one of the things that I specialize in is not every one of my clients fits this model, but I have 15 years of recovery from alcoholism. So I specialize in working with entrepreneurs who are challenged by alcoholism or addiction.
How much of a problem is that for them? Are they aware of it?
Well, the answer is it depends. And it depends both how much of a problem this is. It depends. Are they aware of it? It depends. I've had clients who started working with me who they just came to me for help as a business coach. And, in the course of time and conversations, it started showing up as getting in the way of what they want. And, that's led to conversations that maybe alcohol is not serving them in their life.
I've worked with a few alcoholics and drug addicts at the time, and some of them weren't aware they had a problem.
Yeah, for sure. And some, after you work with them and you point it out and you ask them questions, are still in denial. I was in denial for more than 20 years and as a daily drinker. So I get that. Like, you're in denial until you reach the point where you're willing to not be in denial anymore.
And you realize what's best for you.
Yeah, or in my case, I just got sick and tired of being sick and tired.
So what are the key takeaways from your coaching of entrepreneurs?
My belief is that for most of us entrepreneurs, we are the biggest impediment to the business that we want to build. And, businesses can only grow, in my opinion, as fast as the leadership at the top. And since the entrepreneur is usually the CEO and the principal leader of the business, where the entrepreneur goes is how fast the business can grow. Now, secondarily is how fast you can grow that next level of leadership and the level of leadership under that. Those, I think, are the principal limits on growth. Assuming you have a solid business, you've got a market, the market has a need, and you're fulfilling it, right? So some of the business basics are there. And so that's kind of a starting point for me. And like the coaching journey with my clients is they really define where they want to go. Like I always start, what do you want to achieve in the next 6 months? What do you want to achieve in the next 12, in the next 18? What are you looking for in a coach? What do you not want in a coach? If we work together for 6 months, how will you know that we were successful? I believe the way coaching works, it has to be a mutual coaching agreement between the client and you. And it's really about where the client wants to go and where they're willing to work with you.
So what are the key impediments that entrepreneurs face when they're building a business?
Well, the starting ones are that I see. I've done years of angel investing and working with startups. And I would say in a lot of cases in that very nascent early stage is not really understanding your market and not understanding the pain that the market's in. The way I categorize it is, does the market have a really deep pain that they need a solution to? And how good's your pain pill? How well does it solve their pain? And the bigger the pain and the better your pain pill, the more value, and generally the more you can charge. So in the opening pieces are, we understood the market need, if you come up with a solution that's going to solve it. So that's kind of the first piece on the entrepreneurial journey. And I work more with owner founders who've grown their business to a certain level and then have got stuck, and they're stuck growing it to the next level. And then it's trying to help them figure out, what's getting in the way of that growth. Did they not bring in the right people? Did they bring in the right people, but they're not letting those people actually do what they can do? Because owner founders, When you grow a business, you do everything. And then as you grow and you hire really skilled expert people, it can be incredibly difficult to let go and let them do their work, especially if they do it differently than you do it. So a certain amount of my coaching is just around that whole people issue and how to lead other people and set clear goals and then let them do their stuff and without micromanaging them.
What I found with a lot of owner founders, and we're talking here about small to medium-sized businesses, is that they tend to be a bit all over the place in terms of strategy. They tend to hook onto the latest trend without having a very clear idea of what it is about. And then they leave that trend for some odd reason. And so they're not consistent. I find that.
I would say I am one of those entrepreneurs, and most of the entrepreneurs I work with all suffer from what I call shiny red ball syndrome. Oh, look, there's a shiny red ball over there. Why don't we go play with it for a little while? Oh, there's another one over there. Let's go check that one out. And you zig and you zag and you this and you that, and it's that's part of why we became entrepreneurs, is because we like this, being able to go see new things, explore new things, come up with new things. It's not necessarily the way to build a great business. And sometimes I coach entrepreneurs like, you should just become chairman of the board and you should hire a great GM or CEO. And then you go off and explore. Maybe it's new businesses. Maybe you don't do it in the original business. You'll find some other people start another business and pursue that shiny red ball that looks really interesting to you. So that lack of focus. And entrepreneurs, like, we want maximum freedom. So a lot of the coaching I do is about writing down clear objective goals with clear finish lines. A small number, like if you can achieve 5.25, I think you're doing pretty well. Entrepreneurs resist doing that because it restricts their freedom. So so it's like, well, do you want freedom or do you want a successful business? Like, you got to decide. And if you want a successful business, I'd encourage you to write down and stick to goals for 13 weeks at least, without changing.
So for 3 months, at least.
At least. I really coach a lot around, where do you want to end up in 3 years? And like 4 or 5 key thrusts to get you there. What are the 4 or 5 things you have to achieve this year so you can get to where that bigger vision is? And then what do you have to do this quarter? And I think 13 weeks is long enough to get serious stuff done, and short enough that if you totally blew it and went off in the wrong direction, you still have time to course correct without catastrophic failure of the business.
What's the importance of teams for entrepreneurs?
At some point, you can't do it all, even if you stay awake 24 hours a day, right? At some point, the business grows bigger than you. And so you need help to do that, whether you subcontract that, whether you hire for that. And, ultimately, I think when you build a good enough team around you, the collective group is smarter than you. I really help coach and believe you should hire people smarter than you. And so collectively, they are smarter than you. And you should be using that collective wisdom to create, a much better business. But you need to be able to listen to them and trust. A lot of it is building trust and, being able to let go.
And and put your faith in your team.
Yes, indeed.
So how difficult is that for entrepreneurs, or how much of a challenge is that?
Again, it's, entrepreneurs are human beings, so every one of them is different. Again, I think the very nature, only like 10% of the population ever become entrepreneurs. Like, you got to be a really kind of weird out there person to be crazy enough to want to start a business. And a lot of people say, well, I'm tired of the corporate grind and I'm going to start my own business and it'll be easier. I hate to tell you this, but it probably won't be. But it'll probably be worthwhile. So this drive, this figure it all out, that's what lets you actually build a business until it doesn't work for you.
And the other issue too is that a lot of entrepreneurs' businesses fail as a result.
Yes. Yeah. And for all sorts of reasons. I think the principal reason is you run out of cash. And that could be because you didn't really understand the market and the market didn't really have enough pain for what you were charging for your solution and what it costs you to build it. But I forget what the 1 year and the 5 year success rate is for small businesses. I know you're based in Australia, so I'm sure the numbers are similar, but it's a depressingly low number, high number that fail, right? But I've also seen a lot of entrepreneurs start businesses without much of a plan. So, you're not setting yourself up for success. And I don't believe in 80-page business plans. I believe in a model that's something called the one-page strategic plan, written by a guy called Vern Harnish, where you kind of capture all the core essence of your business in a page. It's a big page, has to be printed on on a big sheet of paper, but it's still all those basics need to be there. What your revenue is going to be, your gross margin, what your net margin is going to be. Like, are you going to make money? I have met entrepreneurs who said, I had a business where I lost money on every sale, and that business didn't succeed. And they were only half joking. I mean, they just did not really understand their business. And they were, in fact, losing money on every sale.
And so conversely, though, the entrepreneur could emerge from that with better knowledge for their next venture. Because they're
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally. And it's very interesting. I think there's a very big difference philosophically in Canada versus the US. I think Americans are much more open to this. Oh, you started a business and you failed. Oh, well, I actually want to work with you because you got a lot of better chance that your next one will work. Whereas in Canada, as angel investors, we tend to keep giving them a little more money, keep letting them kind of inch along. Angel investors in the US, it's like, here's $1.5 million. You said you're going to do this the next 18 months. Okay, we'll get together in 18 months. You spent all the money. You didn't do what you said. Fine. We're taking you out back, shooting you. It's over. This one's done. All right. What's next? It's a very different kind of, we're Canadian. We're too nice. We don't like to be nice to people. And I don't think it's actually good to be nice. I think you have to be hard nosed as investors and directors of businesses. I think it's actually a bit of a failing of us Canadians, and obviously it's a gross generalization, but
yeah, sure.
You get the notion.
Absolutely. Well, David, it's been a delight talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Great, thank you.
And now let's talk to RMIT economist Jonathan Boymel.
Well, Jonathan, what's your view about the property market, particularly when the RBA has kept interest rates on hold?
Yeah, it was interesting. The market consensus was for a rate cut this month. The ASX rate tracker indicated there'd be a 97% probability of a cut, and all four major banks forecast a 0.25 percentage point reduction. And again, this expectation followed two earlier cuts in the year, and most economists thought the RBA would continue easing to support the economy and the property market, but the RBA surprised markets by holding the official cash rate steady at 3.85. And that decision went against the widespread expectation of a cut, leaving many borrowers and other property market participants waiting for some further relief. And look, further relief is on the way. It's just a matter of timing and the timing of data releases. And I think that's the issue that Governor Michelle Bullock really emphasised, that she's waiting for the RBA board is waiting for the full quarterly CPI, which is due at the end of July, before making any moves. The last round of quarterly data went up to March, and that wasn't released until April. And then the RBA's preferred measure of inflation, the trimmed mean, or the underlying inflation, was just within the target threshold of 2.9%. And so they just want to wait until the next round of quarterly data comes out at the end of July. They just want to confirm that inflation is still on track. And in all likelihood, it is. If you take a look at the minutes, they're talking about risk to inflation being more balanced. But there's a level of caution. We have seen in terms of national home values, they reached a new record high in July 2025. Nationally, the prices are up by about 3%, with really strong growth in Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth as well. Sydney and Melbourne more modest. Melbourne, actually, if you take a look at the annual change in property prices, it's declined slightly. So in terms of your question, what's going to happen in light of the RBA's decision to hold rates, it could potentially slow the pace of property price growth seen recently, after the February and May cuts, because buyers and investors were expecting further easing. But buyer competition is really strong. Investor activity is at a 3-year high. So I think we'll see continued momentum, following earlier rate cuts, and also the expectation still of cuts in the coming months. And economists still expect rate cuts in the latter half of this year.
So given that the quarterly CPI figures will show that the trim mean is still within the RBA's band, and so we can probably expect rate cuts in August and possibly beyond. I mean, some economists are talking about rate as low as 2.85% in March next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the governor of the RBA, Governor Bullock, she mentioned that, and this is her quote, an easing cycle is coming if inflation remains under control. So really the next move for the RBA hinges on the upcoming CPI data. And as you mentioned, it's unlikely that we'll just see one cut in the official target rate, but Governor Bullock's referring to an easing cycle. Then we're likely to see multiple cuts in the months ahead, assuming that inflation still remains under control.
Which will see property prices and values increasing.
Absolutely. And it's not like we haven't seen growth recently. So, it's a mixed bag, right? For those in the property market. The concerns remain about affordability. They're not going away anytime soon. So, yeah, we probably see a continuation of the most recent changes, like the quarterly changes that we've seen in house prices across all capital cities. They've sort of ranged from 1.1% growth in Sydney and Melbourne to, look at Darwin, that's gone up by 5% over the quarter. So you'd expect to see similar growth, in the months ahead.
That leaves the big question open for the government about the so-called housing crisis and housing affordability.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, affordability remains a constraint for many households, and in the very short term, the RBA's cautious approach might temper price increases, but that would be only in the very, very short term. So I don't see the housing affordability issue going away anytime soon.
Indeed, and when rates were increasing, housing affordability still remained an issue. Prices were increasing.
Absolutely. I mean, we did last year see some moderation in price growth, and that provided some benefits to potential home buyers. But now that we're expecting an easing cycle, there is renewed concern, as there has been for many years, about housing affordability.
Well, the big issue for the government is supply and demand, and so the question is, how do you supply extra houses? And so you've got a whole lot of construction issues and construction industry and all of that stuff, all of those constraints.
Yeah, exactly. And on the demand side, we've got really, really strong investor activity as well. And so, as you said, taking a look at both the supply side, but also the demand side, with investor activity really, really strong. You'd expect that house prices will continue to grow in the way that they have grown, probably over the most recent quarter.
My suspicion is it comes down to more than just building extra houses, but it's actually creating the infrastructure around the houses. So for state governments, it's not just about setting aside land and permits and all of that stuff, and councils setting aside permits, but also creating more issues like public transport.
Oh, absolutely. And from time to time, you see articles on the front pages, with households that have bought in outer urban areas and who've been disappointed by the deal that they have received in terms of the lack of infrastructure. And I do think that provides a level of caution to those who might be thinking about the true value of houses in the outer urban areas, which, as you say, aren't supported by adequate infrastructure. So livability is a real issue.
And so that's quite a constraint on governments, because all governments are now constrained with their finances.
Yes, absolutely, and that obviously brings in the larger issue around population growth and so on. So it's an issue with many factors impinging on it. And we've been having these discussions for a very long time, and there doesn't seem to be any relief in sight for people who are planning to buy their first home.
Yeah, well, when I look at the debate, I often wonder whether governments actually get it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Look, it's obviously a trade-off. We know that a lot of wealth is tied up in the housing stock, and so governments are really, really conscious about that. So having a negative impact on wealth could also do some damage to the economy. So they're wary about seeing substantial falls in house prices as well.
But at the same time, the construction industry employs a lot of people.
Absolutely, it does. It does. But again, it's just one sector, and employment in one sector rarely, determines the well-being of the country as a whole.
Well, it'll be fascinating to watch, Jonathan. And look, thank you again for your time.
Always. Thanks, Leon.
So what's happening in the news? Well, the European Union thought it was on the verge of a deal with the US to keep tariffs in check. Now it is readying a counterattack. US officials told the EU's trade chief this past week they expect President Trump to demand further concessions from the bloc to get an agreement, including a baseline tariff on most European goods that could be in the range of 15% or higher. That was an unwelcome surprise for the EU, which had been working toward an agreement that would have kept baseline tariffs at 10%, already a tough concession for some of its 27 countries. The shift prompted Germany, Europe's biggest economy and its largest exporter, which had previously been more dovish on US retaliation, to swing closer to France's more confrontational position, according to people close to the discussions. Now EU member states are pressing the bloc's executive body to prepare new and potent measures to hit back against US companies beyond retaliatory tariffs on goods if a deal can't be reached on the August the 1st deadline set by Trump. All options are on the table, a German official said on Friday. The officials said there was still time to negotiate a deal, but added, if they want war, they will get war. What sort of war? On Friday, Berlin signalled it could support the EU using its so-called anti-coercion instrument, a legal tool that lets the bloc hit back at economic bullying with a range of restrictions on trade and investment. It has never been used before. EU officials view the tool as the bloc's most powerful trade weapon and a last resort. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who leads the EU's executive arm, said earlier this month that the instrument was created for emergencies, and we are not there yet. That assessment could change. The Commission is already preparing measures that could be introduced using the anti-coercion instrument, people briefed on the matter said. Member states now say they want the tool to be ready. Push to increase potential countermeasures marks a turning point for the EU after months of negotiation to salvage the world's biggest trading relationship. More than $5 billion of goods and services moves between the two economies every day, according to EU data. The European Commission, which is in charge of the bloc's trade policy, said on Sunday that it wants a negotiated, mutually beneficial agreement and remains deeply engaged in negotiations. If no satisfactory outcome is found, all options remain on the table, a spokesman said. On Sunday, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick expressed optimism about reaching an agreement with the EU. I'm confident we'll get a deal done, Lutnick said on CBS's Face the Nation. And it will be great for America because the president has the back of America. The EU suspects that's BS. The bloc has little to show for its efforts. Earlier this month, Trump threatened 30% tariffs on imports of most goods from the EU, up from the 20% the president floated in April. Even German officials who have pressed for a quick deal no longer see an agreement with the US as the most likely outcome, people familiar with the matter said. In the months since Trump took office, EU Trade Chief Markus Sefcovic has flown to Washington half a dozen times. He's had multiple calls and texts with US trade officials, and he said Europe was willing to lower tariffs and buy tens of billions of dollars of US energy products and advanced semiconductors. And Donald Trump's lawsuit against Rupert Murdoch threatens to rupture the bond that has helped the US write together for the last decade. Trump is suing Murdoch after the Wall Street Journal, which is owned by Murdoch, published an embarrassing letter, allegedly from Trump, in the 50th birthday scrapbook for Jeffrey Epstein, the pedophile who would later die by suicide in jail. The typed letter reportedly included a drawing made with a heavy marker of a naked woman over which Trump had allegedly signed his name over pubic hair, with a message wishing that every day be another wonderful secret. Trump, who categorically denies it was his drawing or words, had threatened Murdoch that he would sue his ass off and that of his third-rate newspaper, as if anyone would be able to get Murdoch's ass. But then Murdoch chose to publish. The newspaper says it will defend its reporting in court. And here's the thing, the lawsuit looks likely to maintain public attention on Trump's friendship with Epstein, which Trump claims ended years before Epstein was convicted on a prostitution solicitation charge in 2008. That's not a good look for the US president. The 94-year-old Murdoch is weighing up whether Trump is losing his grip on the MAGA movement over the Epstein saga. The MAGA people are rebelling against Trump. Murdoch, whose mother lived to 103, thinks he's going to live forever and that he will outlast 79-year-old Trump. Watch this space. And HealthScope, Australia's second largest hospital operator, which collapsed into administration in May with $1.6 billion in debt, has got the ball rolling on becoming a not-for-profit company. It's working on a proposal to put in front of its 30-plus lenders. As part of this, it's exploring applying for the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission, the ACNC, to become a registered organisation, aided by receivers McGrath-Nicol. That would be one of several steps it needs to become a non-profit entity. Healthscope is gung-ho on the not-for-profit plan for several reasons. First, it avoids major disruption by keeping the hospital group intact in the face of a possible breakup, as bidders jostle for individual hospitals. Larger operators also have better leverage when negotiating with health insurers, trade unions and landlords. Tax is also a key consideration. Not-for-profits are exempt from payroll tax. With about 19,000 staff on its books, this would save Healthscope around $80 million to $100 million annually. Improved earnings mean it can likely raise additional external debt, allowing it to pay out existing lenders and hedge funds. For government, the argument goes that if Healthscope was sold to a not-for-profit rival like St Vincent's, Calvary Healthcare or St John of God Healthcare, the state would forego that revenue stream. Finally, as a not-for-profit, Healthscope can mount a pitch to ideologically driven surgeons that they can operate at a for-purpose organisation that doesn't impose religious restrictions on certain procedures like abortions. Surgeons are a key revenue source, and the sector is in a war for talent. The fate of Healthscope's not-for-profit plan will ultimately be decided by its lenders, chief among them London's Plus Capital and Los Angeles-based Canyon Partners. Its pitch is that Healthscope can only be sold once, and allowing management to run it as a group free from crushing debt and rent woes will benefit the shareholders. And Chinese brands will make up almost half of new vehicles sold in Australia within a decade, in the most substantial shift in the market since Japanese manufacturers toppled Holden as the country's most popular car. By 2035, 43% of cars imported into the country will come from China, where manufacturers are increasingly at the forefront of a shift towards electrical vehicles. Chinese manufactured cars make up just 17% of sales now, according to the Centre for International Economics, a research firm engaged by automotive dealers to forecast future demand. 10 years ago, according to the analysis, almost no cars were imported from China. Japan, with 29%, had the biggest share of sales in Australia. We saw the rise of Japan in Australia. We saw the rise of Korea as an automotive manufacturing power. But I think what's different with China is the scale and the absolute speed with which they bring products to market, said James Vortman, the chief executive of the Australian Automotive Dealer Association, which represents car yards. There is a mentality there that if you can succeed in Australia, you're setting yourself up for success in the rest of the world. If we see brand departures from Australia, like we saw with Holden some time ago, that can only be bad. You won't have a place to service your car. You won't have a brand to honour your recall obligations. Given that motor vehicle is generally either the largest or second largest purchase that a consumer makes, that is a bit concerning. Led by the largest manufacturers like BYD, Geely and Chery, Chinese car makers are aggressively expanding not only in Australia but in Europe and the United States. BYD, which has overtaken Tesla as the best-selling electric vehicle manufacturer in Australia, recorded a 368% increase in sales in June compared to the same period last year, according to MA Moelis. Chery and GWM, other established brands, also grew quickly. At least 23 Chinese brands are already for sale in Australia or have confirmed launch plans, while another 5 are likely to arrive soon, according to the Dealers Association. Those include Avatar, an SUV manufacturer part-owned by commodities giant CATL, and Manfrotto Motor, which specialises in trucks and sports utility vehicles. A new ANZ Chief Executive, Nunos Matos, has admonished employers in a series of town hall meetings held at the bank over the past month, saying that he was receiving a high volume of complaints about service and flagging a cultural overhaul as he stamps his authority over the major lenders. Matos spoke about a permanent transformation that would affect every employee, as a former HSBC executive who took the top job in May reworked its leadership team. The culture has to pivot, has to evolve from a culture that is respectful and is friendly, collaborative, and on top of that, a culture that is clear, Matos said. People know what to do and what not to do. That is decisive, he told the meeting in Sydney, adding how we're hearing from up to 5 customers every day. We'll be in permanent transformation in today's business environment. Change is the name of the game. There's not a single person in this company that cannot transform the company a little bit. Matos arrived at ANZ after a tumultuous period for the bank, which remains under investigation by the Australian Securities Investments Commission for allegedly manipulating the market when it sold $1.4 billion in government bonds in 2023. It has been excluded from lucrative bond sales by the Australian Office of Financial Management since. When Matos joined HSBC in 2015, he was tasked with cleaning up a considerable scandal after American prosecutors found at least US $881 million in drug trafficking money was laundered through HSBC's accounts. A Senate inquiry in the US also condemned the bank for moving funds for those linked to Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah and helping Iran, Sudan and North Korea evade sanctions. And Nine Entertainment's largest shareholder, billionaire media and property magnate Bruce Gordon, is quietly eyeing off ways to seize control of the company after it finalises sale of its stake in real estate business Domain. Mr Gordon owns 19.98% of Nine through its private investment firm Berkatu, and swaps that he will intend to convert to equity by November that will take his shareholders to 25.22%. Gordon is mulling whether to then make a full takeover for Nine, or more likely use accrued provisions to increase his stake by 3.6% every 6 months once the Domain sale has been completed and Nine's valuation drops. Mr Gordon is a titan in a shrinking field of billionaires who still like free-to-air TV. He already owns Win, the world's largest privately owned regional television network and infrastructure-style property company, but has long harboured ambitions to own Nine. The 96-year-old businessman insists age has not wearied his desire to control Nine and put himself in the same sphere, on the domestic media front at least, as rival media owners Kerry Stokes, Nine's former owner, the late Kerry Packer, or even Rupert Murdoch, who's 94. And Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has denied the lack of a first face-to-face meeting with Donald Trump is hurting Australian interests, arguing no other country had secured better trade arrangements than the US, and Australia gives and deserves respect. He also says his 5-day, 6-night visit to China has produced concrete outcomes and has denied it's being too deferential towards Beijing at a time when geopolitical tensions are ratcheting up. I support Australia's national interests and I engage with the world as it is, rather than as some people would like it to be, he said. Australia's national interest is served by having engagement with China. Albanese's visit to China was the longest by an Australian Prime Minister in living memory, and he was feted in Beijing, spending almost 5 hours with Chinese President Xi Jinping and President Li Qiang. While Albanese has now met Xi 4 times, he may not hold talks with Trump until September, when international summit season kicks off, after the US President cancelled a planned meeting last month on the sidelines of a G7 in Canada. Some rare public disagreements between Canberra and Washington have also emerged with the Trump administration, pushing Australia and another close ally, Japan, to lift defence spending and pre-commit forces to defending Taiwan. A Pentagon review has cast doubt on the plan to provide nuclear-powered submarines to Australia under AUKUS. Albanese and senior ministers have also criticised Trump's imposition of tariffs on Australian exports to the US as not the act of a friend. Ministers also drew comparisons with Trump's small government agenda to tar former opposition leader Peter Dutton as Trump light during the election campaign. The opposition has accused Albanese of letting the bipartisan relationship with the US drift by not building a bond with Trump, who values personal connections with leaders. But the PM denies Australia's on the nose with Trump and his team, contrasting his approach to countries that have got engaged more directly with the US. No country has got a better arrangement at this point in time on tariffs than Australia, Albanese said. I support free and fair trade. We do not support tariffs, but no country has received a better outcome. The announcements that have been made, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Vietnam, have all been higher than Australia's tariffs, and the UK is the same. Our alliance is important with the United States. The conversations I've had have been two-way, respectful for both sides. Australia gives respect and we deserve respect. Australian exports to the US have been saddled with a baseline tariff of 10%, with steel and aluminium incurring a 50% tariff. Of course, Albanese has to negotiate a reduction in Trump's threat to impose tariffs of 200% on pharmaceuticals to appease Big Pharma, who donate heavily to presidential campaigns. There are fears that tariffs on Australian pharmaceuticals could cost the economy up to $2.8 billion. Big Pharma wants Trump to negotiate to force Australia to make changes to a pharmaceutical benefits scheme, or the PBS, which keeps drugs cheap here compared to the US. Australia said it won't negotiate on the PBS. Japan's proposed tariff is 25%, despite its Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba being one of the first leaders to head to the Oval Office after Trump's inauguration. Trump, who also cancelled the first meeting with South Korean President Lee Jae-myung at the G7, has also proposed a 25% tariff on Korean goods. The UK remains on the 10% baseline under its trade deal, but did negotiate a reduction in tariffs on cars and steel imported to the US. Albanese's visit to China evoked past trips to the Middle Kingdom by Labour icons Gough Whitlam and Bob Hawke, with stops to the Great Wall and to see pandas, respectively. And that's it for this week. And next week I'll be talking to Charles Zarafa, Senior Finance Broker with Integrity Finance Australia. with over 25 years of experience in business and corporate banking, who has a massive, remarkable track record of handling lending applications exceeding $1 billion, encompassing diverse industries from small businesses to multinational corporations. And I'll be talking to Indeed economist Callum Pickering about the latest jobs figures and the surprising spike in unemployment. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from my website, leongettler.com. If you like Talking Business, please leave us a review with Apple Podcasts. Thank you in advance. In the meantime, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, or X as it's now known, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. If you want to contact me, email me at leon@leongettler.com. I answer all emails. Also in my spare time, I have a copywriting business. If anyone needs newsletters, blogs, articles, or advertorial, email me. Looking forward to the next episode of Talking Business.